Hello, and welcome to Bookspot. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time we're going to continue our reading of Citizen of the Galaxy by Robert Heinlein. Our young hero Thorby ran an errand for Pops, but he comes back to find their little hidey-hole home has been raided by the police. Chapter 5. Thorby spent the next several hours in the black corridors outside their ruined home near the first branching, where he could hear Pop if he came back, but where Thorby would have a chance to duck if police showed up. He caught himself dozing, woke with a start, and decided that he had to find out what time it was. It seemed as if he had been keeping vigil a week. He went back into their home, found a candle, and lit it. But their only clock, a household eternal, was smashed. No doubt the radioactive capsule was still reckoning eternity, but the works were mute. Thorby looked at it and forced himself to think in practical terms. If Pop were free, he would come back. But the police had taken Pop away. Would they simply question him and turn him loose? No, they would not. So far as Thorby knew, Pop had never done anything to harm the Sargon, but he had known for a long time that Pop was not simply a harmless old beggar. Thorby did not know why Pop had done the many things which did not fit the idea of harmless old beggar, but it was clear that the police knew, or suspected. About once a year, the police had cleaned out the ruins by dropping a few wretch gas bombs down the more conspicuous holes. It simply meant having to sleep somewhere else for a couple of nights. But this was a raid in force. They had intended to arrest Pop, and they had been searching for something. The Sargon's police operated on a concept older than justice. They assumed that a man was guilty. They questioned him by increasingly strong methods until he talked. Methods so notorious that an arrested person was usually anxious to tell all before the questioning started. But Thorby was certain that the police would get nothing out of Pop which the old man did not wish to admit. Therefore, the questioning would go on a long time. They were probably working on Pop this very minute. Thorby's stomach turned over. He had to get Pop away from them. How? How does a moth attack the Presidium? Thorby's chances were not much better. Baslam might be in a back room of the district police barracks, the logical place for a petty prisoner. But Thorby had an unreasoned conviction that Pop was not a petty prisoner, in which case he might be anywhere, even in the bowels of the Presidium. Thorby could go to the district police office and ask where his patron had been taken, but such was the respect in which the Sargon's police were held that this solution did not occur to him. Had he presented himself as next of kin of a prisoner undergoing interrogation, Thorby would have found himself in another closed room being interviewed by the same forceful means as a check on the answers, or lack thereof, which were being wrung out of Baslam. Thorby was not a coward. He simply knew that one does not dip water with a knife. Whatever he did for Pop would have to be done indirectly. He could not demand his rights because he had none. The idea never entered his head. Bribery was possible for a man with a pokeful of stellars. Thorby had less than 2 minims. Stealth was all that was left, and for that he needed information. He reached this conclusion as soon as he admitted there was no reasonable chance that the police would turn Pop loose. But on the wild chance that Baslam might talk his way free, Thorby wrote a note telling Pop that he would check back the next day and left it on a shelf they used as a mail drop. Then he left. It was night when he stuck his head above ground. He could not decide whether he had been down in the ruins for half a day or a day and a half. It forced him to change plans. He had intended to go first to Inga the greengrocer and find out what she knew, but at least there were no police around now. He could move freely as long as he evaded the night patrol. But where? Who could or would give him information? Thorby had dozens of friends and knew hundreds by sight, But his acquaintances were subject to curfew. He saw them only in daylight, and in most cases did not know where they slept. But there was one neighborhood which was not under curfew, Joy Street, and its several adjoining courts never closed. In the name of commerce and for the accommodation of visiting spacemen, tap rooms and gaming halls and other places of hospitality to strangers in that area near the spaceport never closed their doors. A commoner, even a freedman, might stay up all night there, although he could not leave between curfew and dawn without risking being picked up. This risk did not bother Thorby. He did not intend to be seen, and although it was patrolled inside, he knew the habits of the police there. They traveled in pairs and stayed on lighted streets, leaving their beats only to suppress noisy forms of law-breaking. But the virtue of the district, for Thorby's purpose, was that the gossip there was often hours ahead of the news, as well as covering matters ignored or suppressed by licensed news services. Someone on Joy Street would know what had happened to Pop. Thorby got into the honky-tonk neighborhood by scrambling over rooftops. He went down a drain into a dark court, moved along it to Joy Street, stopped short of the street lights, looked up and down for police, and tried to spot someone he knew. There were many people about, but most of them were strangers on the town. Thorby knew every proprietor and almost every employee up and down the street, but he hesitated to walk into one of the joints. He might walk into the arms of the police. He wanted to spot someone he trusted, whom he could motion into the darkness of the court. No police, but no friendly faces either. Just a moment, there was Auntie Singham. Of the many fortune-tellers who worked Joy Street, Auntie Singham was the best. She never purveyed anything but good fortune. If these things failed to come to pass, no customer ever complained. Auntie's warm voice carried conviction. Some whispered that she improved her own fortunes by passing information to the police, but Thorby did not believe it because Pop did not. She was a likely source of news, and Thorby decided to chance it. The most she could tell the police was that he was alive and on the loose, which they knew. Around the corner to Thorby's right was the Port of Heaven Cabaret. Auntie was spreading her rug on the pavement there, anticipating customers spilling out at the end of a performance now going on. Thorby glanced around each way and hurried along the wall almost to the cabaret. "Psst! Auntie!" She looked around, looked startled, then her face became expressionless. Through unmoving lips, she said loud enough to reach him, "Beat it, son. Hide. Are you crazy?" "Auntie, where have they got him?" "Crawl in a hole and pull it in after you. There's a reward out." "For me? Don't be silly, Auntie. Nobody would pay a reward for me. Just tell me where they're holding him. Do you know?" "They're not." "They're not what?" "You don't know. Oh, poor lad. They've shortened him." Just so you know, that means beheaded. Thorby was so shocked that he was speechless. Although Baslam had talked of the time when he would be dead, Thorby had never really believed in it. He was incapable of imagining Pop dead and gone. He missed her next words. She had to repeat, "Snoopers, get out." Thorby glanced over his shoulder. 2 patrolmen moving this way, time to leave. But he was caught between street and blank wall, with no bolt hole but the entrance to the cabaret. If he ducked in there, dressed as he was, being what he was, the management would simply shout for the patrol. But there was nowhere else to go. Thorby turned his back on the police and went inside the narrow foyer of the cabaret. There was no one there. The last act was in progress, and even the hawker was not in sight. But just inside was a ladder stool, and on it a box of transparent letters used to change signs billing the entertainers. Thorby saw them, and an idea boiled up that would have made Baslam proud of his pupil. Thorby grabbed the box and stool and went out again. He paid no attention to the approaching policeman, placed the ladder stool under the little lighted marquee that surmounted the entrance, and jumped up on it with his back to the patrolman. It placed most of his body in bright light, but his head and shoulders stuck up into the shadow above the row of lights. He began methodically to remove letters spelling the name of the star entertainer. The two police reached a point right beside him. Thorby tried not to tremble and worked with the steady listlessness of a hired hand with a dull job. He heard Auntie Singham call out, "Good evening, Sergeant." "Evening, Auntie. What lies are you telling tonight?" "Lies indeed. I see a sweet young girl in your future, with hands graceful as birds. Let me see your palm, and perhaps I can read her name." "What will my wife say?" "No time to chat tonight, Auntie." The sergeant glanced at the workman changing the sign, rubbed his chin, and said, "We've got to stay on the prowl for old Baslam's brat. You haven't seen him?" He looked again at the work going on above him, and his eyes widened slightly. "Would I sit here swapping gossip if I had?" He turned to his partner. "Raj, move along and check Ace's place, and don't forget the washroom. I'll keep an eye on the street." "Okay, Sarge." The senior patrolman turned to the fortune-teller as his partner moved away. "It's a sad thing, Auntie. Who would have believed that old Baslam would have been spying against the Sargon, and him a cripple?" "Who, indeed?" She rocked forward. "Is it true that he died of fright before they shortened him?" "He had poison ready, knowing what was coming. But dead he was before they pulled him out of his hole. The captain was furious." "If he was dead already, why shorten him?" Come, Auntie, the law must be served. Shorten him they did, though it's not a job I'd relish." The sergeant sighed. "It's a sad world, Auntie. Think of that poor boy led astray by that old rascal, and now the captain and the commandant both want to ask the lad questions they meant to ask the old man." "What good will that do them?" "None, likely." The sergeant poked gutter filth with the butt of his staff. "But if I were the lad, knowing the old man is dead and not knowing any answers to difficult questions, I'd be far, far from here already. I'd find me a farmer a long way from the city, one who needed willing hands cheap and took no interest in the troubles of the city. But since I'm not, why then as soon as I clap eyes on him, if I do, I'll arrest him and haul him up before the captain." "He's probably hiding between a row of beans, trembling with fright right this minute." "Likely, but that's better than walking around with no head on your shoulders." The police sergeant looked down the street and called out, "Okay, Raj, right with you." As he started away, he glanced at Thorby again and said, "Night, Auntie. If you see him, shout for us." "I'll do that. Hail to the Sargon. Hail." Thorby continued to pretend to work and tried not to shake while the police moved slowly away. Customers trickled out of the cabaret, and Auntie took up her chant, promising fame, fortune, and a bright glimpse of the future, all for a coin. Thorby was about to get down, stick the gear back into the entranceway, and get lost, when a hand grabbed his ankle. "What are you doing?" Thorby froze, then realized it was just the manager of the place, angry at finding his sign disturbed. Without looking down, Thorby said, "What's wrong? You paid me to change this blinker." "I did?" "Why, sure you did. You told me—" Thorby glanced down, looked amazed, and blurted, "You're not the one!" "I certainly am not. Get down from there." "I can't. You've got my ankle." The man let go and stepped back as Thorby climbed down. "I don't know what silly idiot could have told you—" He broke off as Thorby's face came into light. "Hey, it's that beggar boy!" Thorby broke into a run as the man grabbed for him. He went ducking in and out between pedestrians as the shout of "Patrol! Patrol! Police!" rose behind him. Then he was in the dark court again and, charged with adrenaline, was up a drain pipe as if it had been level pavement. He did not stop until he was several dozen roofs away. He sat down against a chimney pot, caught his breath, and tried to think. Pop was dead. He couldn't be, but he was. Old Poddy wouldn't have said so if he hadn't known. Why, Pop's head must be on a spike down at the pylon this minute, along with the other losers. Thorby had one grisly flash of visualization, and at last collapsed, wept uncontrollably. After a long time, he raised his head, wiped his face with his knuckles, and straightened up. Pop was dead. All right, what did he do now? Anyhow, Pop had beat them out of questioning him. Thorby felt bitter pride. Pop was always the smart one. They had caught him, but Pop had had the last laugh. Well, what did he do now? Auntie Singham had warned him to hide. Potty had said plain as anything to get out of town. Good advice if he wanted to stay as tall as he was. He had better be outside the city before daylight. Pop would expect him to put up a fight, not sit still and wait for the Snoopies, and there was nothing left he could do for Pop now that Pop was dead. Hold it. When I'm dead, you are to look up a man and give him a message. Can I depend on you, not goof off and forget it? Yes, Pop, you can. I didn't forget. I'll deliver it. Thorby recalled for the first time in more than a day why he had come home early. Starship Sisu was in port. Her skipper was on Pop's list. The first one who shows up, that's what Pop had said. I didn't goof, Pop. I almost did, but I remembered. I'll do it. I'll do it. Thorby decided with fierce resurgence that this message must be the final important thing that Pop had to get out, since they said he was a spy. All right, he'd help Pop finish his job. I'll do it, Pop. You'll have the best of them yet. Thorby felt no twinge at the treason he was about to attempt. Shipped in as a slave against his will, he felt no loyalty to the Sargon, and Baslam had never tried to instill any. His strongest feeling toward the Sargon was superstitious fear, and even that washed away in the violence of his need for revenge. He feared neither police nor Sargon himself. He simply wanted to evade them long enough to carry out Baslam's wishes. After that, well, if they caught him, he hoped to have finished the job before they shortened him. If the Sisu were still in port, she had to be. But the first thing was to find out for sure that the ship had not left. The first thing was to get out of sight before daylight. It was 1,000,000 times more important to stay clear of the Snoopies. Now that he had it through his thick head, there was something he could do for Pop. Get out of sight, find out if the Sisu was still dirtside, get a message to her skipper, and do all this with every patrolman in the district looking for him. Maybe he had better work his way over to the shipyards where he was not known, sneak inside and back along the way to the port and find the Sisu. No, that was silly. He had almost been caught over that way just from not knowing the layout. Here, at least, he knew every building and most of the people. But he had to have help. He couldn't go to the street, stop spacemen, and ask. Who was a close enough friend to help, at risk of trouble with police? Ziggy? Don't be silly. Ziggy would turn him in for the reward. For 2 minims, Ziggy would sell his own mother. Ziggy thought that anyone who didn't look out for number one, first, last, and always, was a sucker. Who else? Thorby came up against the hard fact that most of his friends were around his age and as limited in resources. Most of them he did not know how to find at night, and he certainly could not hang around in daylight and wait for one to show up. As for the few who lived with their families at known addresses, he could not think of one who could both be trusted and could keep parents concerned from tipping off the police. Most honest citizens at Thorby's level went to great lengths to mind their own business and stay on the right side of the police. Had to be one of Pop's friends. He ticked off this list almost as quickly. In most cases, he could not be sure how binding the friendship was, blood brotherhood or mere acquaintanceship. The only one whom he could possibly reach and who might possibly help was Mother Schaum. She had sheltered them once when they were driven out of their cave with wretch gas, and she had always had a kind word and a cold drink for Thorby. He got moving. Daylight was coming. Mother Schaum's was a tap room and lodging house on the other side of Joy Street and near the crewman's gate to the spaceport. Half an hour later, having crossed many roofs, twice been up and down in side courts, and once having ducked across the lighted street, Thorby was on the roof of her place. He had not dared walk in her door. Too many witnesses would force her to call the patrol. He'd considered the back entrance and had squatted among garbage cans before deciding that there were too many voices in the kitchen. When he did reach her roof, he was almost caught by daylight. He found the usual access to the roof, but he also found that its door and lock were sturdy enough to defy bare-handed burglary. He went to the rear with the possibility in mind of going down, trying the back door anyhow. It was almost dawn and becoming urgent to get under cover. As he looked down the back, he noticed ventilation holes for the low attic, one at each side. They were barely as wide as his shoulders, as deep as his chest, but they led inside. They were screened, but a few minutes and many scratches later he had one kicked in. Then he tried the unlikely task of easing himself over the edge feet first and snaking into the hole. He got in as far as his hips, his clout caught on the raw edges of screening, and he stuck like a cork, lower half inside the house, chest and head and arms sticking out like a gargoyle. He could not move, and the sky was getting lighter. With a drag from his heels and sheer force of will, the cloth parted and he moved inside, almost knocking himself out by banging his head. He lay still and caught his breath, then pushed the screening untidily back into place. It would no longer stop vermin, but it might fool the eye from 4 stories down. It was not until then that he realized that he had almost fallen those 4 stories. The attic was no more than a crawl space. He started to explore on hands and knees for the fixture he believed must be here, a scuttle hole for repairs or inspection. Once he started looking and failed to find it, he was not sure there was such a thing. He knew that some houses had them, but he did not know much about houses. He had not lived in them much. He did not find it until sunrise striking the vent holes gave illumination. It was all the way forward on the street side, and it was bolted from underneath. But it was not as rugged as the door to the roof. He looked around, found a heavy spike dropped by a workman, and used it to dig at the wooden closure. In time he worked a knot loose, stopped, and peered through the knothole. There was a room below. He saw a bed with one figure on it. Thorby decided that he could not expect better luck. Only one person to cope with, to persuade to find Mother Schaum without raising an alarm. He took his eye away, put a finger through, and felt around. He touched the latch, then gladly broke a fingernail, easing the bolt back. Silently he lifted the trap door. The figure in the bed did not stir. He lowered himself, hung by his fingertips, dropped the remaining short distance, and collapsed as noiselessly as possible. The person in bed was sitting up with a gun aimed at him. "Took you long enough," she said. "I've been listening to you for the past hour." "Mother Schaum, don't shoot!" She leaned forward, looked closely. "Baslam's kid," she shook her head. "Boy, you're a mess, and you're hotter than a fire in a mattress, too. What possessed you to come here?" "I didn't know where else to go." She frowned. "I suppose that's a compliment, though I had rather have had my plague of boils if I'd had my druthers." She got out of the bed in her nightdress, big bare feet slapping on the floor, and peered out the window at the street below. "Snoopy's here, Snoopy's there, Snoopy's checking every joint in the street 3 times in one night and scaring my customers. Boy, you've caused more hoorah than I've seen since the factory riots. Why didn't you have the kindness to drop dead?" "You won't hide me, Mother?" "Who said I wouldn't? I've never gone out of my way to turn anybody in yet, but I don't have to like it." She glowered at him. "When did you eat last?" "I don't remember." "I'll scare you up something. I suppose you can't pay for it?" She looked at him sharply. "I'm not hungry. Mother Schaum, is the Sisu still in port?" "Huh? I don't know. Yes, I do. She is. A couple of her boys were in earlier. Why?" "I've got to get a message to her skipper. I've got to see him. I've just got to." She gave a moan of utter exasperation. "First he wakes a decent working woman from her first sleep of the night. He plants himself on her at rare risk to her life and limb and license. He's filthy dirty and scratched and bloody, and no doubt will be using my clean towels with laundry prices the way they are. He hasn't eaten and can't pay for his tucker, and now he adds insult to injury by demanding that I run errands for him." "I'm not hungry, and it doesn't matter whether I wash or not, but I've got to see Captain Krause." "Don't be giving me orders in my own bedroom. Overgrown and unspanked you are, if I knew that old scamp you lived with. You'll have to wait until one of the Sisu's lads shows up later in the day, so's I can get a note out to the captain." She turned toward the door. Water's in the jug, towels on the rack. Mind you get clean." She left. Washing did feel good, and Thorby found astringent powder on her dressing table and dusted his scratches. She came back, slapped 2 slices of bread with a generous slab of meat between them in front of him, added a bowl of milk, left without speaking. Thorby hadn't thought that it was possible to eat with Pop dead, but found it was. He had quit worrying when he first saw Mother Schaum. She came back. "Gulp that last bite and in you go. The word is they're going to search every house." "Huh? Then I'll get out and run for it." "Shut up and do as I say. In you go now." "In where?" "In there," she answered, pointing. "In that?" It was a built-in window seat and chest in a corner. Its shortcoming lay in its size, it being as wide as a man but less than a third as long. "I don't think I can fold up that small." "That's just what the Snoopies will think. Hurry." She lifted the lid, dug out some clothing, lifted the far end of the box at the wall adjoining the next room as if it were a sash, and disclosed thereby a hole that went on through the wall. "Scoot your legs through, and don't think you're the only one who's ever needed to lie quiet." Thorby got into the box, slid his legs through the hole, lay back. The lid, when closed, would be a few inches above his face. Mother Schaum threw clothing on top of him, concealing him. "You okay?" "Yeah, sure. Mother Schaum, is he really dead?" Her voice became almost gentle. "He is, lad. A great shame it is, too." "You're sure?" "I was bothered by the same doubt, knowing him so well. So I took a walk down to the pylon to see. He is. But I can tell you this, lad, he's got a grin on his face like he'd outsmarted them, and he had, too. They don't like it when a man doesn't wait to be questioned." She sighed again. "Cry now if you need, but be quiet. If you hear anyone, don't even breathe." The lid slammed. Thorby wondered whether he would be able to breathe at all, but found that there must be air holes. It was stuffy, but bearable. He turned his head to get his nose clear of the cloth resting on it. Then he did cry, after which he went to sleep. He was awakened by voices and footsteps, recalled where he was barely in time to keep from sitting up. The lid above his face opened, then slammed, making his ears ring. A man's voice called out, "Nothing in this room, Sarge." "We'll see." Thorby recognized Poddy's voice. "You missed that scuttle up there. Fetch the ladder." Mother Schaum's voice said, "Nothing up there but the breather space, Sergeant." "I said we'll see." A few minutes later he added, "Hand me the torch." You're right, Mother, but he's been here." "Huh?" "Screen broken back at the end of the house and dust disturbed. I think he got in this way, came down through your bedroom and out." "Saints and devils, I could have been murdered in my bed. You call that police protection?" "You're not hurt, but you'd better have that screen fixed or you'll have snakes and all their cousins living with you." He paused. "It's my thought he tried to stay in the district, found it too hot, and went back to the ruins. If so, no doubt we'll gas him out before the day is over. Do you think I'm safe to go back to my bed? Why should he bother an old sack of suet like you?" "What a nasty thing to say, and just when I was about to offer you a drop to cut the dust." "You were? Well, let's go down to your kitchen then, and we'll discuss it. I may have been wrong." Thorby heard them leave, heard the ladder being removed. At last he dared to breathe. Later she came back grumbling and opened the lid. "You can stretch your legs, but be ready to jump back in. 3 pints of my best. Policeman." And we'll follow Thorby's further adventures next time.